Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here. And Black Panther Wakanda Forever was probably, under any circumstances, going to be one of the most anticipated films of the year. But obviously, following the tragic death of Chadwick Boseman, adds a whole new kind of real-world dimension to this. So it just hit theaters, so let's talk about it. So let me be honest right from the start, I was up all night with a 7-year-old that was puking his guts out all night. So I'm going off of not a whole lot of sleep, but this is a film that I was excited to talk about, and it's one that I think is going to be kind of a unique conversation. I encourage you guys to jump in the comment sections, let me know what you think of this film. But this is very much a unique Marvel movie. The real world circumstances are really inseparable from the film itself. There is a synergy kind of between the fiction and then like the reality, which I think also makes it a tricky film to review. I think it is, without a doubt, this is the most like emotional and I think kind of meaningful Marvel movie to date. I think at times it's sort of almost like a beautiful tribute to its lost actor and character. On the other hand, I'm not sure if the story itself ever kind of soars or reaches the same level as more like the emotional tribute. It's not to say that this is a bad film. It's not at times. Actually, I think it's an excellent film. It has a lot of stuff going for it, but it also just has a lot of stuff. This is a very busy film. Has just trying to do a lot of things, hold a lot of different kind of storylines and themes and stuff up in the air. And I think kind of far too often, I think it sort of buckles under its own weight. But why don't we get into this? I think maybe the first thing just to address off the start is the loss of Chadwick Boseman and that whole dimension. And I know there was some like uneasiness or questions as far as like, should they recast? Is it sort of like a gimmick to use a real world tragedy? And is that just like something icky about using that for like emotional story beats? It is not that at all. This film handles sort of the loss of the actor really as well, I think, as feasibly possible or imaginable. And you feel his presence really from start to finish. It colors everything that happens in this film, including kind of like an adjusted opening titles, which essentially acts as like a moment of silence to kind of set the tone that this is sort of a movie that is paying tribute and kind of this process of mourning, and it kind of unfolds like that. This like guided, almost like cathartic process of grieving, and sort of as the characters do it, also kind of the real world and the audiences do that. So that is definitely, I think, handled as well as you could hope for. But one of the byproducts of sort of a Black Panther movie without kind of at least the original Black Panther is that it makes this more of like an ensemble film. It's not necessarily as focused on like one character. It's sort of more all the characters and how the loss of the Black Panther affects them emotionally and kind of with his family. The Latita Wright as Shuri, kind of his sister, she's sort of the main character, even if it is an ensemble cast. She takes on a more central role. And she crushes it. She is fantastic. She carries this movie. She totally sells sort of the emotion and the journey of her character. The Black Panther, his mother is also played well. Lupita Nyong'o is one of my favorite actresses. She's in this not as much as I wish she was, but she's great. Really, all the actors, all the characters in this are delivering kind of their A game, and probably maybe a standout is the villain in this, which is not always the case in a Marvel movie. Namor, sort of this newly introduced villain, kind of from the kind of beneath the ocean, and he sort of has his own kingdom. I don't think the actor necessarily just doesn't have the same kind of magnetic charisma. Like he doesn't necessarily steal scenes or command the scene whenever he's on, like maybe some of the other ones, like even at Christian Bale and the latest Thor movie, where he sort of this like draws you in every time he's on screen. Namor in this isn't necessarily that, but kind of what makes up for that is that he is a fascinating character. He's, I think, by far one of the more well-developed kind of villains, if you even want to call him a villain, a foil, at least an antagonist in this. You believe he has motivations. He has you kind of sympathize with like his humanity, what he wants. He makes sense, which just makes him way more of an interesting kind of a character, not just like a foil that we need to have a bad guy. So let's have him. So I enjoyed that. But kind of on the other hand, kind of despite this like the kind of emotional kind of earnestness that this film has all throughout, not everything works. I think maybe thematically, and we'll get into that in just a second. Kind of thematically, this movie is very razor focused and really unified. Everything kind of comes back to one specific point, and that is well done. But on the other hand, narratively, this thing is a bit of a jumbled, kind of convoluted. I wouldn't say it's a mess, but it's just kind of it unfolds almost like a series of moments or scenes that are just sort of scattered, and they never seem to really flow or like any kind of cohesion of these scenes. It jumps around just a ton, just like geographically, or there's constantly these new like name, title screens of like, now we're in this location, now we're back here, this is a new place, and it's sort of jumping all over the place. There's a bunch of there's like new characters which are fine but don't add a whole lot to an already kind of expansive cast, and even like returning characters like Martin Freeman. Mr. Bilbo Baggins himself, he's back seemingly because he was in the first one, and he has nothing to do. His storyline, like very, very, barely touches the actual overall story. He's just sort of there, and it kind of cuts to him now and then, and he's sort of doing his own thing, and really just taking up screen time, doesn't do a whole lot in a movie that's already like over 2.5 hours. So there's just a lot, I think, too much kind of going on in this. I don't know if that's a consequence of maybe like they had sort of a story and then they had to shift gears when they lost their Chadwick Boseman, and then you sort of get some of both of those stories or what it is, but definitely too much. And as far as even like the direction of this, Ryan Coogler, who's a fantastic director, you feel his fingerprints on this. There are moments where, and this is like his use of music, which was unique kind of to the first Black Panther movie, and so you kind of, and like even like the way the some of the action was, like, you still feel his fingerprints. But this film lacks the energy, kind of the energy that the first Black Panther movie had. It is way more kind of muted and subdued, where like the first one sort of had this like vibrant colors and like very like bombastic kind of action and just sort of like not aggressive in a bad way, but just sort of like in your face. This really pulls you in. This one just, nothing really pops in this movie. Like none of the scenes stand out or kind of get you on the edge of your seat. It all just sort of feels somewhat monotone, and some of that obviously is a result of like the tone and the theme and dealing with grief and stuff, and so it makes more sense to not to be cut as colorful or some of that. But some of it is just that the story isn't as engaging, or none of the scenes seem like they're quite as inspired, or the action scenes are constructed in a way that sort of draws you in as much. And I think it's kind of like, while the story, I think, was like, it's emotional and it's like meaningful, I'm just not sure if it's ever all that like exciting or fun, which again, maybe that's what the movie is going for, but definitely not quite as compelling as the first Black Panther movie. As far as content, things to consider on the surface of this, really not a whole lot. Profanity, kind of the standard for these MCU movies, maybe even less than like a movie like the latest Thor had. This sort of handful of kind of more minor profanities, mostly starting with the letter S, but not to the level that I found it kind of annoying or too much in their violence. Same kind of standard bloodless MCU kind of comic book action, nothing to worry about there. Sexuality, really the only thing that I think maybe could fall into the kind of this category is at the end, and this is a scene that comes completely out of nowhere. I don't know if it was like left over from like another cut subplot, or if it is just sort of like a token thing. But there is a female character, one of the warriors, kind of when they're celebrating near the end, it kind of cuts to them. And she kind of kisses another of the female warriors on the head and calls her like my love. And it seems, at least to me, that very kind of romantic overtone, like undertones for this thing, although it's not like explicitly stated or framed that way. And it comes out of nowhere, and they move on. They never go back to that. But again, that's maybe the only thing that would maybe fall in like the sexuality category. And maybe the other one is this sort of spirituality, kind of faith and spiritual things plays a pretty prominent role. I think the film actually starts with like a blank screen, and you hear a voiceover of a prayer, kind of praying to kind of the gods to help her and kind of save her brother. And so you get that. Obviously, it's more of like a maybe like African religion or tribal. It's not like in a biblical religious sense, but characters talk about like the gods, and this is multiple times characters are like praying to the gods. And there's also like an aspect of like they constantly talk about, when they die, they go see their ancestors, or their ancestors are watching over them. So they definitely have kind of that sort of spirituality really scattered all throughout this film. So like I said at the start, I don't think this is necessarily the most like enjoyable or like fun or exciting movie, because I think it makes the decision to focus more on like the thematic stuff, and the result of that is that the kind of thematically, this is a really good movie. This is a movie kind of from start to finish that that kind of is an exploration of the theme of grief. Characters grieving, asking kind of difficult questions without the film necessarily kind of spoon feeding simplistic answers to that. But just the question of like, how do we move on from loss? How do we move on from tragedy? How do those things kind of impact us going forward, either for better or for worse? And I think that one of the strengths of this film is that it lets its characters deal with those questions with sort of raw and like honest emotion. The Bible verse that came to mind in this, Ecclesiastes 3:4, where it says, "There's a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance." And just the fact that, hey, there is a time to grieve. There's nothing wrong with grieve, and you kind of see these kind of the various characters grieve in very different ways. They kind of have their own way of responding, whether it's sort of pulling back or focusing on something else or kind of retreating into themselves for a bit or whatever it is. And the film never really seems to judge characters for how they do that, or imply there's just one way to grieve, other than to caution against allowing that grief to become this all-consuming thing, or to lead to sort of this like destructive anger or vengeance because of that. Obviously, the film is very clear that's sort of the issue they need to overcome. But as far as this grieving, I think this film handles that really well. And kind of as a part of that, I think as Christian viewers, one of the interesting themes in this film is how grief kind of leads people towards faith and spirituality. And again, like I said earlier, the faith and the spirituality in this context is not necessarily like a strictly biblical faith or the biblical God or anything like that. But I think just sort of the overarching theme of sort of faith is of interest to Christians and is sort of well done. And there's a really good scene in this where Suri and her mother are they're off together, and the queen's trying to kind of help her daughter go through this like religious ritual and to overcome her grief, and kind of says, she did this and it did bring her some peace, and she sort of felt the presence of her son, and Suri kind of rebukes her, saying, hey, that's this mental construct in your brain. It's not real. It's just what you want to believe. And her mother kind of responds to that, saying, well, what is your kind of mental construct that your brain is making, and is that bringing you peace? And it's this interesting question of sort of where does peace come from, if not from faith, if not from kind of the spiritual reality? And that is sort of Suri's throughout this film, sort of her character arc is sort of on that journey to find faith. She's much more like scientifically minded. She kind of retreats into her technology and her invention and her science, and yet that doesn't bring her peace. And at several times she asks hard questions about, then if that is true, then why did this happen? Why did this horrible thing? Why wasn't I able to do this? And characters say, hey, I don't necessarily have an answer to this. And the film does end with conclusion. I don't want to spoil the whole journey of her character, but there is sort of a satisfying, I think, from a Christian perspective, conclusion to sort of that path towards faith and wrestling with that. So thematically, I think this film does actually a lot of really interesting stuff. So in the end, I think Wakanda Forever is a unique film, which I think makes it a unique one to kind of approach. I don't know if kind of traditional good, bad necessarily works for this kind of film. I think because it is sort of a film that's born out of a very unique and kind of tragic real life circumstances. And I do think in that way this film does well. This film does sort of separate itself from sort of the crowded MCU, and it does kind of dive into areas of like human existence and emotions and stuff that some of these films don't. I just don't think that the story around that ever kind of gets to that same level of quality, and kind of this is sort of this back and forth tension that is pulling it down. So I don't know. I enjoyed this film for what it was. I don't think this is a film that there's anything in it that I'd want to go back and watch again. I think it works more as like a cultural moment to sort of grieve this moment, not necessarily as this is just an exciting film that I want to go back to and watch again, like I think the first film was. But hey, let me know what you guys think. This is if you enjoyed this film, if you kind of appreciated it for what it was, or if you maybe just sort of were distracted by the plot and the narrative and were let down and maybe didn't live up to the hype that sort of was established by the first one, we'd love to have a conversation about that. And if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. We got a lot of other reviews and live streams and stuff. We'd just love to have you be a part of that. But thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe and continue to Collider through World for Christ.